All right. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Joint California Working Group on AI Frontier Models, as well as our partners at the UC Berkeley College of Computing, Data Science and Society, the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI, as well as the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, we're delighted to have you all here for a very timely conversation on the future of AI governance. My name is Julianne McCall. I'm the CEO of the California Council on Science Technology. We are an independent, nonpartisan organization based in Sacramento, established via the legislature to serve essentially as the national academies for the state of California, providing science advice in science and technology to our policymakers. California is lucky to have such an incredible network of expertise in the sciences, right? Presented by extraordinary representatives here on the stage. Our job at CCST is to help amplify and translate that expertise for actionable advice for policymakers. We provide this advice through a number of mechanisms via events like the one that you are at today, as well as workshops, peer-reviewed reports. We are constantly answering the phone calls from legislators, right, connecting them with experts to answer their very specific questions. We also have some very exciting news of a new initiative that I'll be able to share with you at the end of this event. So stay tuned for what's on the horizon. So now on to today's panel. In the last 5 years, rapid advances in AI technology have already reshaped many aspects of our lives, challenging us to reimagine our approaches to societal pillars like education, healthcare, and workforce. Today, California has a golden opportunity to help shape the global future of AI development, supporting ethical and equitable deployment of technological tools and ensuring that benefits are accessible to all Californians. Last September, Governor Gavin Newsom requested a team from Berkeley CDSS, HAI at Stanford, as well as the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace to prepare a report focused on AI frontier models. After a public feedback period, the Joint California Working Group on AI Frontier Models published their final report just last month. This report leverages broad evidence from empirical research to historical analysis to modeling and simulations to provide a framework for policymaking at the frontier of AI development. So we are so privileged today to have the opportunity to hear from our the three co-leads of that report, Dr. Fei-Fei Li, Dr. Tino Cuéllar, as well as Dr. Jennifer Chayes. To lead us through the discussion, I'm honored to introduce our moderator, Jason Elliott, president of Versus Solutions. Prior to founding Versus just last year, Jason was the governor's deputy chief of staff, a position in which he advised the governor on numerous policy issues, as well as matters of state operations. Jason, it's all yours. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you, Julianne. And thanks to the CCST team for hosting this event today. We appreciate you putting this together. I will go ahead and introduce our three panelists very quickly, and then we're going to hop into some questions. After a few questions that I've put together, we'll have an opportunity for the audience to ask questions. When we do that, please wait for a microphone because we are joined by a live stream audience and they will not be able to hear you unless you speak into a microphone. So we'll do a little hand raising situation for that when the time comes. So in order, as they sit to my left, your right, Jennifer Chayes is dean and led the establishment of the College of Computing, Data Science and Society at UC Berkeley. She is also a professor of electrical engineering and computer sciences, information, mathematics, and statistics. I think that's basically every discipline. Are we missing any? She speaks French, Latin, and Russian. She runs a 4-minute mile. Before joining Berkeley in 2020, Jennifer was a technical fellow at Microsoft, where she led research programs for more than 20 years. She's also the founder of an AI and materials company. Please welcome with me, Dean Chayes. Next is the Honorable Tino Cuéllar. He's the president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the United States' very first think tank. As a former justice of the Supreme Court of the great state of California, Cuéllar has served 3 U.S. presidential administrations at the White House and in federal agencies, and was the Stanley Morrison Professor at Stanford University. Please welcome Mr. the Honorable Tino Cuéllar. And last but not least, Dr. Fei-Fei Li is the inaugural Sequoia Professor in the Computer Science Department at Stanford University and a founding co-director of Stanford's Human-Centered AI Institute. She served as the director of Stanford's AI Lab from 2013 to 2018. And during her sabbatical from Stanford, January 2017 to September 2018, Dr. Li was vice president at Google and chief scientist of AI and machine learning at Google Cloud. Dr. Li has served as a board member or advisor in various public and private companies. She is currently a co-founder and CEO of World Labs, an AI company focusing on spatial intelligence and generative AI. Please welcome with me, Dr. Li. And so no one accuses us of not stating our biases up front. I will say that I am a California policy fellow at HAI, so I guess that makes Fei-Fei my boss. And Tino is on the advisory council at HAI as well, so biases stated. And I think before we go into the, nothing against Berkeley, it's just, you know. So before we go into the questions, and Julianne—
I think Jason is trying to get an appointment at Berkeley, and
Yeah.
we can try to arrange that.
I'm not qualified. So before we go into the questions, and Julianne mentioned the report a little bit, the report that did come out, I guess it was last month, and what is shaping the dialogue in Sacramento in terms of what the state of California is going to do on artificial intelligence regulation at the frontier. And I want to take a moment. I helped a little bit on that report, but I also want to thank the number of staff people across these three organizations that worked tirelessly on this report. They know who they are, and join me in a round of applause for all of the staff folks who helped put this together, please, as well. So that's all I'll say about the report, because I'd like to hear about the report from the three people who co-led the effort. So Dr. Chayes, we'll start with you. With the report, would you mind giving this audience an insight into how the three of you, I'll ask you to speak on behalf of your friends, how you approached this weighty request from Governor Newsom, I think it was in September or October of last year. What were your guiding principles or your foundational assumptions as you began this endeavor?
Let me join you in thanking CCST. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to get together with all of you. When we came to this report, what was very clear is that, what California should do in this time of frontier AI was a pretty contentious issue. There were lots of people who were passionate on different sides of the question, or who were passionate about dealing with it in ways that that were not always similar to each other. So I think one of our guiding principles was to try to find ways on which we could all agree. Not just the three of us, not just the staff who were helping us, but much more broadly. And, we came up with 8 principles, which I think are very reasonable principles. And not only do we think that, but the reception so far for the report has been extremely positive from Sacramento and, from companies and from lots of people who came in with very different perspectives. So I think that was very, very important. Are there principles on which we all agree? Because that's a great starting point. A second guiding principle for us was, how do we take in and then get feedback from as many different people and groups as possible? And, first of all, we had a very large team, and they were soliciting They were soliciting information in the draft report. The draft report was then sent out to a large group of experts from different areas for them to review and comment on, and we changed the draft report in response to that. And then I think, maybe the most important part was that we opened it up to public feedback. And then we didn't just gather that feedback, but we truly took it in. We tried to figure out what were the various themes which emerged and to respond to those. So I think another thing that was very important to us, since the governor was trying to build consensus, was hear all voices. So hear all voices and build consensus wherever possible, I think were the most important principles.
Thank you for that. And it's a great backdrop and context statement. I imagine everyone in this audience, by virtue of choosing to be here this afternoon, has read the report. Tino, I'm going to ask you, if you were to speak to a high information policy person and explain to them, what does the report find? We heard from Jennifer sort of the outreach principles trying to seek consensus. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the report says? What's its main message?
Thank you, Jason, and it's great to see everybody here. First, let me also add my appreciation to CCST. I'll note that when I first heard about this event and I was told that it might be on a boat, I was a little skeptical, but because I thought, okay, does that mean the report is adrift at sea, right? But I see we are well anchored, and maybe the metaphors were kind of floating above the fray. Think about everything you know about artificial intelligence. First thing that'll come to mind is that if you followed the field, as I know many of you have for years, you know that artificial intelligence is really a family of different technologies. It's like saying cyberspace. So we first had to understand where the governor and the state of California really had asked us to make a contribution. And it wasn't in machine learning generally. It was not necessarily in what we now call data science, although that informed our approach. But it was instead in that narrow but critical space that we will call frontier artificial intelligence. Take the very leading edge of the technology, the place where entrepreneurs, technologists, university professors are working at the very edge of knowledge and advancing it, figuring out how, with the amount of compute and energy you throw at a problem, you can get the most analytical feedback, in effect. And what should a state, a jurisdiction like California do in approaching the governance problems there at the frontier? Now, obviously, that matters because even though the frontier is a sliver of the broader technology space, that frontier is always moving. So in effect, we approach the problem by recognizing that command and control, traditional clunky approaches to regulating a technology that is always fixed would not work in this space. So Jason, I would boil down the basic conclusions to 3 points. The first is that in thinking about how to govern frontier AI, we must consider the benefits as well as the risks. The risks are not small. The risks involve misalignment in general, scheming of models that begin to find ways of fooling the users to think that something's happening when it's not or something's not happening when it is. Uplift in the development of weapons. We've got models that have been tested recently that show a 94 percentile performance in virology knowledge relative to experts. However, the benefits stretch across science, education, finance, healthcare. So consider both the benefits and the risks. Second, policy and governance should be analytically grounded and evidence-based, but crucially, evidence does not just mean quantitative historical knowledge. It also means simulations, tests that you do, analytical environments that you create to see how the technology performs under different conditions. Third, when thinking about what you want from the ecosystem, transparency is critical. It's the lodestar. We'll talk more about that. Trying to understand how it is that the frontier players are managing risks and how they're assessing whether they have the right knowledge. And this is also crucial. And we borrowed this line from Ronald Reagan, and it's trust but verify. Recognize you cannot build a governance system that is all about suspicion, But by the same token, you also cannot simply take as gospel what a particular player says about its technology. Plenty of other details, as you know, even a couple footnotes thrown in, but that's the basic scaffolding of the argument.
Thanks, Tino. And I think, Fei-Fei, next question to you to drill on the first of the three principles that Tino mentioned, benefits and risks. I think it's probably mostly non-controversial to say that people strive to balance innovation and safety. I think it's sort of a thing everyone says, but then it's hard to nail down to the ground what exactly that means. So I'm asking you this as an academic, but also as an innovator. Can you take us a layer deeper into that duality? If we can generally agree that balancing innovation and safety is the proper North Star, help us flesh that idea out. How do you think about that duality, that tension?
Yeah, thank you. I do want to thank CCST again, even though my friends have already done so. Thank you for this beautiful setup. Thank you, Jason, for doing this. I do want to add, I will answer your question, but you asked about the principles of doing this report. There is a unspoken principle that I've always carried while working on this report. I don't think I've shared with Tino and Jennifer, that I will share with you guys now at the risk of reporters in the room, is be boring. And that's not a negative word. It's actually, I think it takes guts to be boring when you are grounded in scientific and evidenced methodology. Tino said that AI is a technology of heterogeneous composition of many different subfields, from machine learning to natural language processing to computer vision to robotics, and also the methods are different. AI is also a term that stirs such extreme emotions on so many sides. And for me to participate, to help good policy making, it's so important to keep the scientific core in our hearts. And I'm a scientist, and Tino is a social scientist, and Jennifer is a scientist, engineer, that we try to ground this in that possibly boring middle, because we have to respect evidence, respect scientific method, respect data. Which brings me to your question, is that if the North Star is the balance, if we embrace being boring a little bit, not hyperbolic on either side, how do we balance the safety as well as the innovation? It's been many years now that as an AI scientist, I keep saying this, there's nothing artificial about artificial intelligence. At the end of the day, this is a technology that's made by people, supposed to work for people, and it will shape our future. It's actually going to shape our future in such a profound way. It's a leading technology of a digital scientific revolution that 21st century is experiencing. It's a leading factor of change that will shape our social, economical, political, cultural lives. And how do we strike a balance in the face of this colossal change? For me, is to ground it to human-centeredness, is that recognizing the human impact, recognizing the human opportunities, recognizing the hope, the dignity, as well as the need for safety and responsibility. All this is, to me, the central principle, as well as a path in balancing the two sides of this incredible technology.
Thank you for that thoughtful answer. I think as to take those big, lofty principles and then try to manifest them into legislation in a place like California in a given year is really the challenge that feels so small and episodic when you have this big, but I think it's really important to try to keep a vision of where we're headed. And I think the report that the three of you co-led does provide, at least in Sacramento, it's parochial, but at least in Sacramento, does provide a directionality that then people can choose to move. And so I think that is a major benefit of the report and the grounding in the philosophy that you just laid out. Now the report, Dr. Chayes, you're next. The report really is about the frontier and regulation at the frontier. That was what Governor Newsom asked you three to look at. I think you did so very ably and very effectively. Through the feedback, the public feedback that you discussed, a number of topics for consideration were proposed by various stakeholders and members of the public. Most of those did not fall inside the scope of the report because the report was not something that the three of you dreamed up. You accepted a request from the governor that had sort of a task and a charge on it. So if I could ask you, Jennifer, of all the topics that were proposed that were perhaps out of scope here, but nevertheless are critical questions for a place like California to explore, is there one that is near and dear to your heart that you think is worth having a discussion about?
Yeah, so as you said, there were topics that we explicitly did not cover. We didn't cover workforce questions. We didn't cover energy use. We didn't cover education questions. So something that I am very passionate about, and I even tried to get my co-leads to include, and they very wisely did not because it wasn't a general principle, is around education and workforce, and some ideas that on which I'm working with many others to make our state, the individuals in our state, the beneficiaries of frontier AI. So this touches on education, and obviously my co-leads agree with me that that's very important, but my suggestions on this got to be too explicit, but I can share them with you here. So as I look back over the past few decades of technology, as new technologies have come in, groups, certain sectors of our population in California and beyond have been disenfranchised and further disenfranchised. Never the intention, but nevertheless the result. And AI is such an incredibly powerful, especially frontier generative AI, is such an incredibly powerful technology that that I believe it should be possible, and we should be able to work together on this to re-enfranchise a lot of people who have been disenfranchised. I see some colleagues from the community college system here. I've heard that some CSU colleagues are online. I think one of the superpowers of the state of California is that we have an intersegmental system. It's that we have the California community colleges, the CSUs, California State, and Berkeley is, of course, a University of California. And so we have a human platform. For me, having been at a company for 23 years that reached routinely over 1 billion people, having platforms that scale is incredibly important. We have 40 million inhabitants of the state of California, and actually 2 million of them are in the community college system, which is really a lot of people. And so we at CDSS, at the College of Computing, Data Science and Society, been working with my friend Safia Noble, who is at UCLA and who came to the whole question of frontier AI from a very different perspective than I, on how can we create curriculum, which we'll use at University of California, Berkeley, but also hopefully use at other segments, and I've talked to Sonia Christian, who is the chancellor of the community colleges. Can we create a curriculum in which we both inoculate people against some of the harms of frontier AI? When I look at certain outputs, I question where they came from because of my training, but not because of very sophisticated training. So can we include a component of that which grounds us in the social sciences and at least inoculates people against unintentional biases, and at the same time teaches people how to create their own AI agents? Agents can, if you create them for your purposes, basically bring resources to you that only those who are much better resourced have in the past. So can we create curriculum? Just imagine, 500,000 students a year in the community college system in the state of California receiving curriculum, and in the CSUs and in the CCC and in the UCs, receiving curriculum that both inoculates somewhat against some of the misinformation and harms and empowers individuals in the state of California. I would love to be working with people in the three systems, maybe with legislators, maybe with philanthropists, on making sure that in California, our people are the beneficiaries of frontier AI.
Well said. Couldn't agree more. The question of teaching kids critical thinking, it's not a new concept, just on a new technology field. So I couldn't agree more. Well said. Tino, I'm going to ask you the next question. As you were laying out the principles that the report followed, the second one you mentioned was that policy should be analytically grounded, and the third was around transparency, trust but verify. And absolutely, those go hand in hand, because in order to trust and verify, you need to have evidence. So those two principles go hand in hand. And I think to get practical in terms of how the state of California may want to think about regulating this, and regulation doesn't just mean curtailing, but how the state of California should regulate frontier AI. There's sort of a healthy discussion in academia. There's been some, there was an opinion piece published by Carnegie. I know you don't own every single thing that Carnegie publishes. Nevertheless, there's been some healthy discussion in academic circles about whether governments, in this case California, should regulate the entities making AI, the companies, or the systems or the uses of those systems themselves. It's a nuance, but I think it's an important one. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Terrific. First, let me just note again what a pleasure it was to work with both Fei-Fei and Jennifer. If you all ever get a chance to work with either one of them, I recommend it highly. I will say I've known Fei-Fei for like 10 years, but even now I'm discovering things. Like I now realize when I would send language over and it would come back really dry and boring. I understand now what's going on, but I take your point. Well, look, let me just be upfront. The bottom line up front, like we like to do it at Carnegie, is that the hardest analytical problem is defining the very edge of frontier AI that should be subject to governance, right? We want an ecosystem of knowledge creation and a transparency in order to be able to make better choices over time about where the risks are, where the benefits are. But, do you just take 10 to the 26 flops? Do you focus on the entities that are plausibly at the frontier and define it a certain way? Do you focus on capabilities of models, recognizing that with every passing month, a combination of energy efficiency and algorithmic breakthroughs are making you get a sort of more analytical throughput from the same amount of compute, right? So we were careful in the report just on that hardest problem, to be honest, and to say we don't have a silver bullet, but we do think that compute thresholds by themselves are probably not the best strategy. Now, let me be very clear. We also don't say, oh, forget compute thresholds, they're totally irrelevant. We do think there's something interesting that happens to these models currently at around 10 to the 26 flops. But ideally, combining that with some measure of entity capability or model capability is useful in focusing attention even more. Now, what does it mean to focus on evidence? The first thing that means is we have to be honest that many of the risks that we can imagine materializing from these models have not yet materialized. That's not the same thing as saying that there are no risks right now, but there is very suggestive evidence that as these models improve, their ability to scheme, to lie to their users, and to provide uplift technically to people who are trying to do harmful things around cyber exploits, biological weapons development will increase in significant ways. So being honest about where we are on risks and benefits is one. The other, though, is recognizing that in order to make sure governance works effectively, we need to unpack that trust but verify and make it more concrete. And I'll highlight a couple things that, to my mind, you can extract from the report. The first is that if you are at the frontier, defined by compute threshold plus something else, then you ought to have a policy for how you're managing the risks of your models. What are you testing and evaluating? Are you using third parties? What claims are you making about the safety of the models? Second thing is that should be disclosed so you can be accountable for that policy, right? You can't just say, oh, we have a policy. We're not going to show it to you. We're not going to tell you what it is, but we have it and it's good, right? The third is that when adverse events occur after you release the model, if you learn about that, that ought to be disclosed as well. And then the fourth is that whistleblowers, which historically played an important role in governance and trust but verify, they should be protected in some way. We don't get into the details in the report. We try to be clear about the principles and leave it to policymakers, legislators to work out the details.
Thanks for that. And I think the way that the report was structured around guiding principles for policy is not the way that Sacramento is used to receiving reports. They're usually much more definitive or declarative. And I think that the way the report was structured along the lines that you just outlined really forced people to, instead of just decide whether they agreed or disagreed with the report, to engage with the concepts.
Bingo. And this is where I think Fei-Fei's point about trying to be boring is helpful, right? Although I will note that as I was going through these principles, the boat started rocking a little bit more.
You just keep working that boat metaphor. It is doing a good job for. So I think that the report. I live in Sacramento. I'm sort of in that milieu. I think there was a lot of expectation. The report's going to come out and it's going to tell us what we need to do, and it was certainly not that. And I think by design and with great effort to tell everyone in the policymaking environment in California, this is going to be a little bit different than we're used to. And one of the things the report did not do was just name a bunch of problems that needed to be solved, right? Which is also sometimes what we get from sort of third-party reports or government reports. That's not what the report did. Fei-Fei, however, I'm going to ask you to take us down that path. So point of personal privilege, I just had the enjoyable experience of reading Fei-Fei's memoir, which if you have not read, you should go buy a copy, available at your favorite local bookseller. In learning more about you, it really struck me that you have just, your entire life has been defined by being able to look around a corner and see what's coming next. So I'm going to ask you to, with perfect accuracy, predict the future to this audience. Joking, of course. But what is one challenge or opportunity from these powerful frontier AIs that policymakers have not yet realized will be the biggest deal 5 years from now? What would you want to tell future legislators or governors to keep an eye out for, either positive or negative or both? I'll sort of let you take it where you want to go.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. And thank you for reading my book. And it is one of my favorite things to do as a technologist is really think beyond think beyond the horizon. For me as a scholar, a technologist, that's my job. Let's just pause for one moment. What is, when a person is trying to see beyond the corner, typically what is the emotion there? When you don't see things beyond the corner. And typically there is anticipation, sometimes excitement, sometimes a lot of anxiety, even fear. And I think that describes AI perfectly well. This is why we keep saying there's so much emotion out there about AI today, because there's so much that's not yet has come, as Tino said. And one of the things I would love to help is to, especially with our policymakers, is to help us to see a little further, so that that anxiety, that fear, is more grounded in what's possible rather than pure imagination without a guideline. So what's around the corner? I do firmly believe, despite all the possible things that can go wrong with any piece of technology, and this is the entire story of human history, that AI is a family of technologies that can do so much good for humanity. The power of compute, the ability to synthesize knowledge, make predictions, do analytics, empower workflow, can really multiply human capabilities in many, many horizontal ways. And for policymakers, I strongly believe this is an important thing to recognize. The public might have a lot of fear, but as leaders of our society, as policy, they say that AI will come before AV. So we'll see. Thank you. As policymakers, I would love to tell them that this technology can help scientific discovery, can accelerate healthcare. I personally have been doing a lot of healthcare and senior care, and I think globally, we're lacking workforce for senior care. We're lacking ways to help to keep our elderly and the sick people home and safe, and AI is a technology that can do that. We can use AI to superpower teachers and students. We can use AI to do further modernization of agriculture. So there's just so much we can do. That's one thing I would love to share with everybody, including policymakers. Another thing I do think is exciting me, and also I feel the responsibility, is there's things beyond language models. We are so fixated in large language models, and I use the word fixated in a positive way, because the horizontal capability of large language models is phenomenal. We are still scratching the surface in terms of the utility use cases of language models. But if you take the analogy of what the holistic human intelligence is, we do recognize there's more than language capabilities. We have tremendous intelligence in what I call spatial intelligence, in seeing the world, perceiving the world, understanding the world, making sense of the 3D world. And that is just around the corner. It's not something that is in the public eye as much, because the research is still in the more R&D stage. But once we unlock the computer's capability to be as spatially intelligent as humans, or even more than humans in certain areas, we would superpower human workflow, productivity, learning, creativity in ways that we haven't seen yet. Another thing that's around the corner is embodied AI, is what we call robotics, as well as, in my opinion, what we call XR, where humans are also superpowered by devices that helps us to see beyond what we can experience with our naked eyes. So whether we're talking about robotic embodied AI, as well as XR, virtual reality, augmented reality, embodied AI, these are all going to be tools that will transform workflow, well-being, scientific discovery, and many things beyond. So for policymakers, I think it's important to know, and one thing that does differentiate 21st century's technological advances compared to, let's say, 400 years ago, the scientific revolution, is the speed of change. It's been accelerated. And it is important that policymakers have the responsibility to learn about the what's coming and make sensible policies to prepare the future workforce as well as prepare the society.
That was fascinating. Thank you. I heard you list a number of social impacts, job disruption, agriculture, healthcare, care economy. I think the main takeaway I'll think about more is that it's not just large language models. And when we start to experience the rapid acceleration of robotics and other spatial intelligence, that we're going to have this conversation all over again in a different context. We're going to ask for audience questions in a moment. Before we do, however, Tino and Jennifer, I'd like to ask you a variation on that same question, which is about if you could address all the nation's governors, all the nation's legislatures, the people that are making policy at the state and local level. We obviously do not now have a federal moratorium on state law, which I, for one, am grateful for. Perhaps opinions differ. Nevertheless, there is now at this moment an opportunity for states, especially California, I would argue, to move forward with legislation, but do so with extreme sensitivity towards the impacts of that and how it will set national and global precedent. So I'll ask maybe Tino and then Jennifer and Fei-Fei, you're welcome to chime into this conversation as well. What message would you want to give to those governors and those legislative leaders around the country?
3 messages. Number 1, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. What do I mean? The enemy of good policy is ego. And ego doesn't just live in the mind of and by the way, Jason, I was going to say you're an expert in ego, but that didn't come out the right way. That's not what I meant.
You know me very well, Tino. Thank you.
What I mean is you have dealt with environments where ego is intense. And in those environments, there is an economy of credit claiming and of wanting to say, it was built here first in the state of Connecticut or in the state of Colorado or in the state of Florida. So in fact, I think what we have an opportunity to do, because let's just put it this way, the federal government is focused on other things, is to create a model that can then ideally standardize a set of straightforward commitments that don't end up with 30, 40 different variations. And if that seems improbable, it is not impossible. This is what has happened, for example, in auto emission standards in the past. So ideally, a couple first mover states, a California maybe, gets together with some AGs, with some other states, and standardizes the basic framework. That's message 1. Message 2, to build on Fei-Fei's excellent point about the possibilities, let us remember that alongside concerns about risk, security, workforce issues, a very large quantity of Americans and an even much larger quantity of people around the world will never experience what so many of us take for granted, which is access to high quality professional services, sometimes including even in our own staff, who can build a sort of protective cocoon around us. The lawyers, the doctors, the executive assistants we have around us. Now, I don't want to minimize the workforce issues. I'll get to that in a second. But I would say to policymakers, let us remember that the world is struggling to take billions of people who want to be in the global middle class and are not. How do we do that without actually, damaging the planet and creating a massive spike in carbon emissions? I don't see a way forward that doesn't run through really creative, thoughtful use of this technology. But then the third point is, let us not forget that the fact that the world might benefit, or California or the country in the aggregate from technological change, is not the same thing as mapping that benefit onto individuals or communities or families. And there's a lot of work to do in figuring out, how do you think about pre-distribution? How do you share the benefits? How do you invite people into a conversation about labor and workforce that's honest? How do you take seriously the disruption in social relationships so we can learn from past experience and navigate this a little better than we have in the past?
Thank you. Appreciate it. Jennifer.
Okay, so I'm going to echo a little bit of what was said before, but maybe with a slightly different perspective or some different examples. I completely agree with Tino that if we could get some standardization, it would be wonderful. I mean, the AI itself knows no boundaries. people move from one state to another, and they work with people in other states. So our businesses certainly don't know state boundaries. And so if we can agree on some principles, and I also want to emphasize that I didn't say this when we started, but one of our other main goals was to not be prescriptive, but to be actionable. And so we tried to come up with principles that were actionable, but in no way prescriptive. And I hope that some of these perhaps will be meaningful to other state AGs and legislators. I also want to address the incredible potential of these technologies to change the lives of individuals. And I had mentioned before trying to train many people in California to use the AI to level the playing field. Not all of us have assistants, not all of us have people who can help in various ways. We have a program with UCSF, and I see Ida Sim, who is there. So it's a Berkeley UCSF program. She is the UCSF co-lead, really trying to use frontier AI to improve healthcare at scale, but a huge component of it also is how do we ensure that it does this in a way that does not exacerbate the inequalities we already have in healthcare. And then speaking to the energy consumption problem and the climate and sustainability problem, that is something that I am personally working on. We are using frontier AI to create materials that pull carbon dioxide out of the air, that produce water in desert air. There are so many ways in which we can use frontier AI to address some of the existential inequalities of our time. And it is incumbent upon us as a society to mobilize to do this.
And you've already told us to be aware of spatial intelligence, so I think that's an exhortation, but tell us, what more would you want to say to the nation's governors, for example?
I want to say one thing. I don't have three things. The one thing to the governor, in order to invest for the future of every state, invest in the AI ecosystem. That means invest in STEM education of K to 12, invest resource, including chips, compute, and data in every single community, state, and higher education universities in your state. Invest in protecting and encouraging your small businesses and entrepreneurial ecosystem. Partner with big companies and invest in the modernization of using AI for better governance, more efficient governance from the government itself. And last but not the least, do a better job in public communication and education of what AI is.
That was a lot more than three. I think that last one is particularly hard.
Sub-bullet.
Yeah, okay, sub-bullet, fine, fair enough. I would love to go a layer deeper with you on the last one around public communication of what AI is. And before we turn to audience questions, I think that the report that the three of you co-led is probably one of the greatest entries into the effort to help people more broadly understand what AI is. So I want to say before we start questions, thanks again for all the time, effort, and energy that the three of you put in to getting this report done. And of course, as a lifetime staffer and a forever staffer, your teams. Now that said, Julianne, how are we doing questions? Do people raise hands? What's the strategy here? Okay, fantastic. Questions, please raise your hands. Caesar's going to come around and give you the mic.
Hi. Yes, I'm Maylin Fung, the co-founder of the People-Centered Internet with Vint Cerf, and I'm glad to be here. I've just come from around the world, the Asia Development Bank, Financing for Development Conference, and the AI for Good Summit in Geneva. Just arrived yesterday. It was very important for me to be here. I want to reflect on the importance of what you're doing in California because the rest of the world needs this leadership. People are terrified of the tech companies. And you are here, and there's a lot of attention on what California is doing. So part of the communication is not just in the United States, but the whole rest of the world is looking at you. I just want to make sure you know that.
Thank you. I think that's a very important point, and I'll just make two observations that reinforce it. The first is the European Union has its own way of doing things, and sometimes they get things right, sometimes not. But one perspective about the importance of the US approach, and maybe here in California, we can define that, being out there in the world, is that there's a rival approach and not just one grounded in the EU's approach. That's one. The second point I'll make is that just in the last few weeks, given that at Carnegie we try to think about issues in a global perspective, what is going to promote cooperation and governance that's effective, we've just had interest in this report from South Korea, from Japan, from South America, and parts of Europe.
I'll make a comment as well about that. You said specifically people are scared of the tech companies, and I worked at a tech company for many years, but I've come back to the public sector. I'm at a state university at Berkeley, and I think it is very important that we make the investments so that make the investments, as Fei-Fei was saying, in compute, in education, so that it is not simply the tech companies that are making these advances. I am not saying that that they would not make good advances, but they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. So I think it's also very important that public universities and universities in general, as more neutral bodies, also be the centers of research and development of frontier AI.
Sure. Hi, thank you so much, Genevieve Smith from UC Berkeley and Dean Chayes. I really appreciate that last comment. Something that I've been thinking about a lot and reading through the report is around the inclusion of bias and discrimination. You mentioned the potential for these tools to address inequalities, but they are set up to amplify inequalities with the pervasive bias and discrimination in these tools. And it seemed in the report that there was a lot of focus around risk thresholds, safety, security. And I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to your considerations around bias and amplification of inequalities and how you think that should come into play with some of these regulations around frontier models.
We are not prescriptive for regulation. Okay, there are ways of auditing. So we suggest auditing, and there are metrics that one can use for auditing bias. And I think, which, as you say, is simply the amplification of what the AI learned from. As Fei-Fei said, this AI is really us. It's not them, it's us. But it can also be the worst part of us, and it can amplify the worst parts of us. We are suggesting that there be, that one consider methods like auditing in support of whistleblowers. So I think we need to quantify the bias. not perfect, but I think it's actually quite doable.
I'll just build on that and note that so the four corners of the report talk about the need for policies to deal with risk. And some of those policies in some private sector organizations will naturally come to encompass also questions of bias. But more importantly, the process of writing the report unleashed a lot of debate, discussion, and deliberation on a set of issues that go beyond what the report could deal with. And I would say, in addition to workforce issues, probably questions around bias were among the most important that surfaced. And we view all that deliberation as ideally teeing up a set of issues for further discussion and work by policymakers in the years to come.
Hi, Jason. Matt Regan with the Bay Area Council. First, I'd like to commend you for your efforts to find that Goldilocks zone between allowing innovation and economic growth and protecting consumers from bad actors. That's absolutely the right approach. The question is, a little over a year ago, I had a conversation with Professor Katie Caves, who teaches at Semitz in Zurich on human economics. And I asked her, you know, what does the future for the workforce hold in an AI-driven economy? And she gave a very bullish, optimistic answer. She said, you know, since the invention of the wheel, there have been 4 or 5 industrial revolutions, all of which have resulted in an increased demand for labor. She doesn't think this one will be any different, albeit short-term disruption, but long-term it will be beneficial for us all in the labor market. How do you see the long-term projections in an AI world for the workforce?
Hello. Yeah. Thank you for that question. In fact, AI, I know workforce is out of scope for this report, but largely, AI and workforce is one of the most important and intriguing topics. At HAI, we actually have a digital economy lab that's specifically studying that. Personally, by and large, I believe that the history of humanity has taught us, like she said, that we do reinvent the labor market over and over again as technology shifts. And that doesn't mean that this process is completely painless. In fact, for policy making, it's very important to recognize where things might really be painful and even to the point of causing regime changes and social, you know, violence and all that. Having said that, I personally believe that AI is a tool that humans can really leverage on to do way more things that we have seen before. For example, in the area of software engineering, we're really seeing a revolutionary change going on with AI assistive coding. And it's really fascinating to see that both the entry-level software engineers as well as extremely senior, highly skilled, most excellent software engineers are taking advantage of these tools in an extremely effective way. I'm seeing this among my students. I'm seeing this in my own company. It actually is a fascinating study that I hope not only Stanford Digital Economy Lab, but many more labs study the impact. There's definitely signs of superpowering and expanding the pie, but it also shifts the way that certain kind of workforce are much more capable of adapting to those change compared to others. And why is that? You know, why is there a difference? How do we upskill and reskill? How do we help preparing the students? Are the topics of our time, and good policy making can help a lot.
Just really quickly, great question. I would say if you take a spectrum and one on the spectrum is like total pessimism, like these machines will take over all jobs, everybody will be unemployed, it's a disaster. And number 10 is like, oh, it'll equilibrate perfectly, everybody will be more productive and there'll be no glitch and it'll be beautiful. I'm like at a 5.7. And I just want to explain that to me, it's not so much that I can't imagine an equilibrium where human-machine cooperation is the modal way of unlocking enormous benefits and keeping people meaningfully engaged in the world. It's that equilibrium is not automatically fated to happen. And I think the Digital Economy Lab is doing some great work on this. I would simply add that the notion of human-machine collaboration at the AI frontier is very under-theorized to my mind. We might start by trying to be more specific about the places where, for the moment, a thoughtful human being whose attention is focused on a problem is at the frontier, like adding something interesting relative to the most sophisticated multimodal foundation model. And I'd mention 4 things. A human is more energy efficient for the kind of cognition you get. Number 2, a human inspires trust and empathy in other humans. Number 3, until, Fei-Fei and colleagues crack the code on very, very advanced robotics, a human is more physically capable in the environment. And number 4, a human is exceptionally good at fewer one-shot learning, like learning really quickly from one example. We are struggling at the technical frontier to fully absorb all that. So there's room, but I don't think that one could just listen to somebody sort of tell an optimistic story and assume that it's automatically going to come about. We've got a lot of work to do.
I would like to have a working microphone. That's awesome. Okay. I would like to talk a little more about the human AI interface. While I believe that these new foundation models and frontier AI is going to change a lot, I don't believe it can change what has to be changed without humans. For example, I'm going to get kind of geeky here, very specific. I don't think we're ever going to have a foundation model for all of chemistry. I mean, there's so much language, okay, and we were able to feed so much of it into the large language models. I think we're going to have a lot of video of, which can substitute for human sight. Humans have not explored all of chemistry. We have not done enough experiments. We have not done, the data does not exist. It's not a matter of feeding it in. We couldn't generate all the data. It's a much larger space. And so I believe that in many domains, what is going to happen, and I see it happening in the chemistry and material science work that I'm doing, is that like a baby does active learning, okay, a baby has some nice foundation model in its head. It's a pretty damn good foundation model. But then they do active learning and they probe and they get ground truth from the world, and that's fed back in, and that updates and that updates. And that, I believe, is an inherently human interface that we are going to have in many domains where the data just does not exist. So 5.7, I might be a 6 on your scale, but I believe that this human AI interface is a profound part of that to deal with advances that I believe are not, we cannot make purely with foundation models.
You to take the final question. I would like to ask a question as I've been listening to this discussion. Fei-Fei, you mentioned at the very end of our question and answer session, public compute and public access to compute resources. So I want to sort of open that up a little bit and ask all 3 of you, whomever would like to answer. We have talked a lot today. The report spoke a lot about Sacramento, worries a lot about guarding against harms, protecting against bias, what's happening at the frontier. Those are all critical questions. I'd like to ask a slightly different question. If you read about or listen to podcasts or talk to technologists, this stuff is going to solve climate change pretty soon, and we're going to discover and solve all disease pretty soon, and it's going to be wonderful. And I am asking you, When is that going to happen, and how can we get there? But let me be a little bit more specific. What business models, what inducement for product design, for research and development must we as government people or we as society demand, such that instead of more and more and more advanced large language models, more and more business optimization agents, we actually get the solutions to climate change and all, and solutions to the care economy use cases, Fei-Fei, that you laid out? How does public compute fit into that? I'm asking this as a leading question because I have had the privilege and opportunity of hearing from each of you personally your thoughts on this topic. I think it would be helpful to share how we can, while we're guarding against the really scary parts, also think about inducing business research and development and business cases towards all these other things that we're told are utopian. So to any of you, and then I know my friend over here has had his hand up the whole time, so he'll ask the last question and then we'll wrap up. But please, all three of you.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, for asking the question. I think you really ask such a critical question. So when we hear AI these days, especially if you're within 20 miles of this boat, is that everything AI equals large foundation models. That's simply not true. The opportunity, the business model, the real public benefit that's out there induced by AI are many, many more applications that can help people. You know, AI applications that helping artists, helping person of visual impairment, helping children with learning disabilities, helping physical rehabilitation, helping well-being management. There's just so much, so that the more we can empower that blossoming of AI application, the better it is for the whole society. But how does that happen? There is actually sometimes an unspoken phase for that kind of blossoming future or economy, is the phase of exploration, the phase of curiosity-driven research, curiosity-driven learning. And so much of that lives in the public sector, because public sector is not tasked for profit-driven activities. So in our colleges, in our universities, in our public sector, we have students, researchers, faculty, given the adequate resource, they would help the society move civilization forward by doing scientific discovery, doing curiosity-driven research that eventually will lead to these incredible applications. Think about, name everything, anything that is useful in your life, whether it's antibiotics, GPS, internet, or you know, DNA test for pregnant moms. Almost everything we now are using in application, in commercial application, can trace back to a history of university, college, public sector research, because during that time, researchers and students are given that freedom to unleash their creativity using the adequate resource to discover these possibilities before we know it's economically viable. What really concerns me right now is that resource for discovery, for curiosity, for exploration that can eventually lead to the advancement of civilization is so drained in the AI space. You know, I was just talking to my colleague from Berkeley just minutes ago. The question is kind of comical, is like, how many chips do you have in your lab? And the answer is none. You know, that's the kind of thing we're facing. My lab, a Stanford computer vision lab, doesn't have a single H100. You know, we barely have A100. This is last 2 generation chips. So I think that's the concern, and that's where I think good policy making can make a huge difference.
Just briefly building on what Fei-Fei laid out, 3 points. The first one is effective clarification of what the governance framework is pro-innovation in the sense that it then narrows the focus on where governance needs to happen and kind of precludes other things from happening. 2, the ecosystem approach. Let's understand that there's an enormous innovation benefit from big companies and small companies, but also universities, government labs, and as they all work together and intersect with each other, learn from each other, have folks move from one place to the other, we're much stronger. Third, purchasing cooperatives. It's one thing to ask, will a particular company be interested in meeting the needs of a low-income Californian or a low-income farmer in India? It's a very different proposition to say 20 million Indian farmers are interested in this particular application, or 1 million low-income Californians actually care about a trustworthy system to help them, minister to the needs of their kids. And then suddenly the companies will be pretty interested.
So I'm just going to pile on here. It was probably Joey Gonzalez you were talking with, and who's from Berkeley. We have so many faculty who are interested in applications of frontier AI for the public good. That, and we're so under-resourced. I do believe that we should actually be interacting more directly with the public sector, which is also under-resourced. It should go without saying, but I will mention that public funding, national funding for research is way, way down and probably only going to get worse. That's a difficulty, and I know that that has affected our state budget, but it is also an opportunity. It is an opportunity for California. If we can lead in providing infrastructure to our universities and to collaborations with the public sector, we can lead not only in the businesses of the future, and much of this will eventually turn into business and fill our coffers, but also in really helping the people of the state of California and beyond to realize the benefits of frontier AI.
Thank you. Gideon Litchfield, journalist, previously editor-in-chief of Wired, now tech policy fellow at UC Berkeley, and I write about technology and the future of democracy. You mentioned in the report that existing regulatory authorities and laws can often be used to tackle some of the impacts and harms of AI. The question I have is, do governments and authorities have the capacity to do this enforcement? We saw, for example, that identity theft, money laundering, stalking, harassment were all problems and crimes before the internet came along. It took law enforcement years to figure out how to identify, investigate, gather evidence for, and enforce those crimes in a digital realm. So, and AI is evolving much faster than that realm did. So I guess the question is, do you see evidence that authorities, states, in particular California, are or have got the capacity or are building the capacity to assess those impacts of AI and deal with those impacts? Or how would you recommend that they go about building that capacity?
I think it's a great question, and I would say we're on a journey in the following sense. First of all, expertise is really critical for precisely all the reasons you're alluding to, and we're not yet at the point where government will be in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. But I see evidence that if you look at the typical sort of tech-oriented lawyer in the AG's office in California, there's likely more knowledge and expertise there than there was 3 or 4 years ago. That's one. Two, I think it's important to recognize that we're not only looking at executive mechanisms, but also the court system. So the tort system is not perfect, but it's a means of achieving certain kinds of enforcement through legal actions. And then third, I would say the report contemplates not only a solution to this that comes from inside the executive branch of a state, for example, but also third-party monitors that might be in a position to evolve organizational models and business models that let them leverage expertise and provide some verification. a little bit in the tradition of audit companies, accounting companies right now. So I think you're right to point out that nothing is as good as it's supposed to be if there isn't a strategy for implementing it. But I just note there are going to be multiple levers that need to be looked at.
So this brings us to the end of this particular portion of this event. I will close with a little story. About a week or so ago, I was on a panel, so I was sitting over there, and there was someone else sitting here, and the question came, so the governor asked for this report after he vetoed 1047. Is this just going to be another report that gets written and sits on a shelf and no one pays attention to it? I'm like, oh God. And I was sitting with a representative from one of the major tech companies and then a leading tech equity advocacy voice to my left. And both of them said, this report is different than other reports that we've seen. People are putting this report into practice. And that just warmed my little heart, because it's exactly what I think you three hope to set out to accomplish when you agreed to take on this effort. And I think the next few months in Sacramento, as the lawmaking process moves forward, will demonstrate just how seriously people have taken this report. And so I hope that next time Governor Newsom comes calling, you will enthusiastically accept every other invite he gives you to write many, many more reports. I'm kidding. It's okay. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking these three fantastic scholars for the work they did in the panel today. Now, somewhere in here is Julianne, I think. Nope, not Julianne.
You have me instead. My name is Eric Chu. I'm the Director of Science Services at CCST. Julianne is back there. I think the rocking of the boat is getting to her a little bit. So she asked me to do this 2 minutes ago, and so I will improvise. The conclusion to the best of my abilities. Just wanted to express sincere gratitude to the panelists and to Jason and the audience and our partners for this wonderful conversation today on the Historic Klamath, which I understand it's 100th year birthday. And so we really appreciate the Bay Area Economic Council for hosting us today. The conversation that we've heard over the past 90 minutes or so reaffirms the power of this truth. That is, California, our great state of California, has the responsibility and the opportunity to lead the way in shaping the future of AI policy that is grounded in science, driven by ethics, and inclusive of the diverse communities our policies and our laws aim to serve. So in that spirit, and on behalf of our CEO, Julianne McCall, CCST does have some wonderful news to share, and that is today, CCST and Omidyar Network, with the support of the Cuéllar Foundation, are launching the CCST Legislative Academy on AI, a first of its kind training program for California's legislative staff. Thank you. The initiative will begin this fall, offering expert-led seminars, policy roundtables, and site visits designed to build fluency and foresight in this rapidly evolving field. The full-scale academy will launch next fall in 2026. With more than 50 AI-related bills introduced in Sacramento in this year alone, we see this as a critical step in strengthening the state's ability to govern wisely and effectively, basically reaffirming the ideas that were presented by the panel this afternoon. And we're really, really deeply grateful to Omidyar Network and the Cuéllar Foundation for their visionary support, and to all of you here today on this beautiful ship, slightly rocking, but still really beautiful, for helping to shape the conversations that will guide California's leadership on AI. And special thanks to Carol Rao from Omidyar and Kirsten Lundgren, who are sitting somewhere in the audience from Cuéllar, who are in attendance today. Thank you again for being a part of this important moment, and we look forward to continuing the dialogue together. So at the end of this event, I'd like to now invite you all to keep this dialogue going during a short reception that we'll have just around the corner back here, where we'll have some light refreshments through the doors, just again, right behind us. Feel free to enjoy the space, but I encourage you to take your refreshments and conversations up to the rooftop deck as well. We have access to that, and enjoy the lovely weather and the view of the city and the bay and the Bay Bridge. And I look forward to continuing this conversation with the many of you there. So thank you again. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks.